We did every MLB team's best player of 2024, and in both that video and a few others, I mentioned the idea of doing every MLB team's best player ever, and you guys gave that a warm reception. So here we are today, going team by team, this time alphabetically instead of division by division. There's no real need here for any rules, aside from the statement that I am going to consider guys that did steroids eligible for this, unlike how some people view the Hall of Fame, though with the caveat that I'm going to be considering their achievements relative to the steroid era if they happen to fall within it, not just their numbers on the page in an isolated fashion, through the use of things like OPS plus or WRC plus that will equalize for a high run environment, with the same being true for dead ball era pitchers or hitters. With that being said, let's hop into it, starting with the Arizona Diamondbacks and a fairly obvious one, being Hall of Famer Randy Johnson, who had one of the best 8-season stretches for a squad in Major League Baseball history, managing an insane 164 ERA+, 2,077 Ks in just over 1,600 innings, 118 wins, and 52.6 BWAR, putting him about 13 ahead of second-place finisher Paul Goldschmidt, who certainly deserves a brief shout-out here along with Brandon Webb. On top of these numbers, Johnson also managed to win 4 straight Cy Young Awards in the desert, including the pitching Triple Crown in 2002, through a perfect game, and even approached the all-time single-season K record with 372 in 2001. This is among the greatest lefty peaks in Major League Baseball history, right up there with Sandy Koufax, and it easily helps him to the #1 spot for this recently formed expansion club. Next up, we have the Atlanta Braves, who, while they do have a host of impressive performers, including multiple Hall of Famers such as Eddie Matthews, Chipper Jones, Greg Maddux, John Smoltz, Tom Glavine, Warren Spahn, and others, also have a clear winner here in Henry Aaron, who managed to, in his time with the Braves, blast 733 home runs, which broke baseball's most prestigious record, long held by Babe Ruth, to go along with 2,002 RBI, 600 doubles, a 159 OPS plus, and positively ludicrous total of 142 WAR, more than 30 ahead of anyone else for the squad. But I guess this shouldn't be much of a surprise, considering he's probably a top 5 outfielder of all time, right up there with a few other guys we'll talk about in a second. The Orioles are up now with another easy pick, being living legend Cal Ripken Jr., who not only set the all-time record for consecutive games played at a nearly inhuman 2,632, but also managed to just be playing great for the team the entire time, registering nearly 100 WAR in his 21 Major League seasons, nearly 20 ahead of second-place finisher Brooks Robinson, and 30 ahead of third-place finisher Jim Palmer, each of whom certainly deserve commendations of their own for their service during the best run in the team's history in the 1970s. Cal paired all that advanced value with plenty of regular impressive counting stats as well, including over 3,000 hits, 600 doubles, 400 home runs, and a career OPS near 800, all from a shortstop who's considered to be an elite fielder for most of his career as well. The Red Sox are up now as another historic franchise with a long list of Hall of Famers in tow, like Carl Yastrzemski, Pedro Martinez, David Ortiz, Cy Young, and someone who would have been a Hall of Famer in Roger Clemens, if it wasn't for the roids, but none of them could quite reach the heights of one Theodore Samuel Williams. The splendid splinter not only posted a career WAR of 121.8, with basically all of that value coming from his bat, but also registered the highest OBP in MLB history at 482, with a crazy high 344 average and 634 slug to go with it. 521 career homers, walking 3 times as often as he struck out, being the last hitter to bat over 400 in a season. We could go on, but I think we'll end it here with the obvious admission that he is probably also a top 5 outfielder of all time, and that's surely enough for a list like this. The Cubs are the first instance of us largely ignoring WAR as our measuring stick, as once you get far enough back in history, like before the 1920s, it gets kinda dicey, which makes Cap Anson, who was certainly a Cubs legend regardless, probably a bit outsized relative to his production in his time. This will be true of other guys in the list as well, unless they manage to far eclipse the people that came later. With that being said, how could I not pick one of the best power-hitting shortstops ever, Mr. Cub himself, Ernie Banks? 512 dingers, the most ever for a clean Cub, a career 500 slug over 2,500 games, and the second most hits ever for Chicago to Anson. Shout out to Billy Williams, Fergie Jenkins, Bruce Sutter, and Ron Santo here as well. The White Sox are a similar case, with Luke Appling having Frank Thomas beat here by almost 10 full BWAR. But we will again look past this and select the guy with a mind-numbingly good 307, 427, 564 slash with 448 dingers with the Southsiders, along with back-to-back MVP wins, 7 straight top 8 MVP finishes, and countless league-leading totals in walks, OBP, OPS, and OPS+. This guy's one of the best pure hitters to hit for significant power in MLB history, right up there with Ted Williams and a few other guys we'll discuss today, and his best years were definitely with the Chi Sox. There's a debate to be had here with the Reds, who are up next. You could go with their all-time leader in hits, modern era batting average, runs, and total bases in Pete Rose, a guy who in his prime was given one of the most iconic nicknames of all time in Charlie Hustle. Or you could pick the team leader in home runs, RBI, and Gold Gloves, who was also one of the main pieces of the Big Red Machine himself, and arguably the greatest overall catcher in MLB history, in Johnny Bench. For my opinion, I choose Johnny, for both how good he was at his peak, which included 2 MVPs, and how well he repped Cincinnati baseball itself. Much of what Rose ended up with as a legacy separated him from the ball club, which is enough for me to tip the scales in Bench's favor when I was already leaning that way anyway. I want to shout out Joe Morgan, Barry Larkin, and Joey Votto for epic Cincy careers as well. The Guardians are our first team to have real old-school superiority, as no one comes close to their big two of Nap LaJoie and Tris Speaker, the latter of which I'll be choosing here as one of MLB's first true superstars, with a Cleveland slash of .354, .444, .520, with 108 triples, 158 OPS plus, and 74.9 career WAR in a little over 1,500 games. Bob Feller, Lou Bondrew, and a surprising newcomer in Jose Ramirez all deserve some shine here as well, with Ramirez being on track to challenge for this spot if he continues his current trajectory for the next 5 to 10 years. We're back to expansion territory now with the Colorado Rockies and Todd Helton. While Larry Walker and Nolan Arenado definitely outpaced him handedly in value created per game, they played about half the contests with the actual team that he did, which certainly means a lot in a list like this. This is reflected in the fact that the first baseman holds team high totals in home runs, hits, doubles, runs, RBI, and walks. It's certainly great to see him in the Hall where he deserves to be, as one of the greatest first basemen in MLB history. Coors Field be damned. The Tigers are another team that bring with them an obvious deadball era outlier, with Ty Cobb being arguably the greatest player of all time at the time he played. What were his totals with the Tigers? How about a 368, 434, 516 slash, 665 doubles, 284 triples, and one of the highest WARs in MLB history with a single team at 145.0. Now, does all this have to be taken with a grain of salt, considering he played before cars were widely available? Of course, but no one in Tigers history was within 50 wins of his value created per Baseball Reference, so we do have to appreciate a performance like this regardless of the dubious era he played in. With that being said, Al Kaline, Alan Trammell, Lou Whitaker, Miguel Cabrera, and Justin Verlander all deserve mentions here as well. The Astros are our first kind of senior expansion squad, first popping up in 1962 and since having quite a few Hall of Fame level position players in Craig Biggio, Jose Altuve, and our selection for their best player ever, Jeff Bagwell. Despite only playing a little over 2,100 games with the Astros, 700 less than Biggio, Jeff managed to rack up almost 15 more WAR due to his insanely productive hitting, which yielded a career OPS plus of 149 at the height of the steroid era, a 297, 408, 540 slash line, and 449 home runs. He was also one of the few first basemen in baseball to be adept at stealing bases, managing to be part of the 30-30 club while stealing more than 15 bases in a season 5 separate times, ending with 202, making him the only member of the 200-200 club to be a first sacker, along with holding the all-time record for total stolen bases at that position as well. Add to that one of the greatest peaks in the history of Major League Baseball, including a season where he had an over 1,200 OPS and 750 slugging percentage in 1994, easily winning MVP, and you get an easy Hall of Famer and the best overall Astros player in the history of their franchise. To me, it feels hard to believe the Royals are a more recent franchise than the Astros, but it's indeed true, with them coming about in 1969, 7 years after Houston. Since then, they've had one player who managed to stand out more than any other, to the tune of creating almost double the value of the next closest entry, a player who has gone down as one of the best third basemen in baseball history, regardless of team, George Brett, with his 3,000 career hits, 1,500 RBI, and runs scored, over 300 home runs, and over 660 doubles. At his peak in the 1970s and early 80s, he managed to lead the league in hits and triples 3 times, while winning 2 separate batting titles, including one in 1980 that saw him flirt with the 400 mark, ending the year with an absurd 390 average and 203 OPS plus. He would go on to win one more batting title at the age of 37, becoming one of the only players in MLB history to win a batting title in 3 separate decades. I do also want to give a shout out here to Kevin Appier, Willie Wilson, and Salvador Perez, who in the next couple of years could end up overtaking Brett for the all-time lead in home runs for the franchise. Our third straight median expansion team arising in the 1960s is the California Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim, who bring in the first active player we're going to discuss today. I'm pretty sure everybody knows who I'm talking about, but I'll just go ahead and state the obvious. Despite only having played about 1,500 games for the team so far, Mike Trout has 30 wins above replacement more than the next closest player in team history, with easily the highest total number of MVPs at 3, a Rookie of the Year, 9 Silver Sluggers, 11 All-Star appearances, and franchise highs in home runs, walks, slugging percentage, OPS, and OPS+. This guy is Mr. Angel, even if in recent years he's probably been equal parts Mr. IL stint. We now have our first pitcher since Randy Johnson, this time for the Los Angeles Dodgers, and our second straight active player, though he might not be active for very much longer, lefty Clayton Kershaw. Since he made his debut in 2008, Kershaw's been no less than the best overall pitcher since integration, from the perspective of both ERA and ERA+, while winning 3 Cy Young Awards, an MVP award, making 10 All-Star games, winning a pitching triple crown, tallying a 300 strikeout season, and leading his league in ERA 5 separate times. While Sandy Koufax certainly had a comparable peak, it wasn't for nearly the same sustained amount of time that Kershaw's was, and while the squad has had a number of stand-up position players, including one of the most important and productive in history, in Jackie Robinson, none can approach the generationally good performance for the extended period that Clayton has managed to put up, and will hopefully continue to add to for at least a couple more seasons, preferably of the relatively healthy variety. We're back in recent expansion territory now with the Miami Marlins, and another absolute slam dunk of a pick, with their franchise record in home runs, RBI, slugging percentage, WAR, and OPS+, all being owned by the same guy in Giancarlo Stanton. This also included 2 top 3 MVP finishes, over 30 home runs in a season 4 times, including a career high of 59 in 2017, which was the same year he actually won the NL MVP, and 4 separate All-Star appearances. The only thing surprising when the Marlins announced they were signing him to the largest contract in baseball history back in 2015 was the fact that they were historically such a cheap franchise. But they managed to get out of that pretty quick after they shipped him to the New York Yankees in the offseason of 2017, where he struggled to stay healthy since. Still, it's very possible he reaches 500 career home runs before he hangs up his cleats. But if he does, and then ends up making the Hall of Fame as a result, there's a reasonably decent chance now he would want to go in as a Yankee and not as a Marlin due to the bad blood with him departing, which I think is pretty indicative of where the Marlins franchise currently is at this point. Absolutely zero Milwaukee Brewer fans are going to be surprised to hear that the mark of best player in franchise history comes down to 2 guys, being Robin Yount and Paul Molitor, though due to the fact that Yount played about 1,000 more games than Molitor, with his superior stats in WAR, hits, doubles, triples, home runs, and walks, I'm gonna have to give it to Robin. His peak was certainly one of the best of his generation, featuring 2 MVP awards, 3 Silver Sluggers, a Gold Glove, and an eventual Hall of Fame induction. Another thing that's interesting about Yount is the fact that he's one of very few Hall of Fame inductees who made a mid-career transition to another position, as he went from the Brew Crew's longtime shortstop to center fielder in 1986, where he would play for the rest of his career. One thing I do want to note here as well is the absolute lack of elite pitching talent coming out of Milwaukee, as only one of their pitchers all time managed to tally over 30 wins above replacement, being Teddy Hagura at 30.3, with the next closest being Ben Sheets, who only managed to pitch in about 1,400 innings for them. The Twins are a tricky one, because technically the Washington Senators played in the early half of the 19th century, then transitioned into Minnesota later on in time, meaning that Walter Johnson, easily one of the best pitchers of all time relative to their era, is technically a Minnesota Twin. With that being said, I don't think that would be a fair selection here, given how rich the history of this franchise has become since their move to the Twin Cities. I think I'm going to choose to treat that early Senators team as a dead franchise, and basically omit it from the video. I did want to acknowledge him though before we move on, and all the immense impact that he had. So, if not Walter, there's an interesting debate here to be had between the top 3 selections we could make, being Rod Carew, Harmon Killebrew, and Joe Mauer. 3 different players who all played a distinct brand of baseball, with Carew being the slap-hitting savant, Killebrew being the big bruiser with major pop, and Mauer being a savvy catcher with top-tier pure hitting ability. They're all pretty much bunched together in terms of WAR as well, with only a margin of about 8.6 separating them across more than 40 years of combined playing time. It's in my opinion you could pick any one of the 3 and not go wrong, but for my money I'm gonna have to choose Mauer here, who will not only go down as one of the best catchers in Major League Baseball history, being inducted on his first ballot, but also a Minnesota icon who never left his hometown club, and only fell short of leading the franchise in many categories due to something completely out of his control, being concussion issues. Again, I would understand if you chose Rod here or Harmon, but I do think that Joe is the correct choice to me. The Mets have had some insane peaks on their team over the years, even if they've had trouble sustaining them, including those of David Wright, Darryl Strawberry, Dwight Gooden, and Jacob deGrom, but only one player in squad history has managed to make at least 350 starts, while combining it with some of the highest production on a rate basis of any pitcher in MLB history. Tom Seaver, who posted a 136 ERA+, over 2,500 Ks and a little more than 3,000 innings at a time where pitchers weren't really posting gaudy K numbers, and won 3 Cy Young titles and 5 strikeout crowns. There's a reason Seaver is on everybody's top 10 best starters of all time, and it all comes down to crazy high production over a high volume of innings, even relative to other pitchers in his day, as evidenced by his by far Mets leading 76 B-WAR, nearly 30 ahead of the next closest. The Yankees, with all of their incredibly rich history, which includes Joe DiMaggio, Lou Gehrig, Mickey Mantle, Derek Jeter, Jorge Posada, and countless others, somehow have a player who managed to rise far above the rest, setting themselves aside from not only their contemporaries or their generational comparison points in their own squad, but from the mass of players in general, as George Herman Ruth, the Babe, is a name that has become synonymous with baseball greatness. And much of that grandeur was tallied for the Bronx Bombers, with which he broke the all-time single-season home run record countless times, reset the career home run record entirely, blasting 659 round-trippers in pinstripes, with more WAR tallied as a Yankee than Joe DiMaggio and Yogi Berra combined at about 142. We mentioned a list of top 5 MLB outfielders before. He's right there as well, arguably ranking in the top 3 of MLB players ever, period. Our next selection comes from the Sacramento-Oakland A's of Las Vegas, with certainly a melancholy overtone presiding over the pick, being the late, great Rickey Henderson. During his time in Oakland, Rickey swiped 867 bases in just over 1,700 games, basically won every other contest, while winning an MVP in 1990, finishing top 10 5 other times, and leading the league in swipes a ridiculous 9 times, ranging from ages 21 to 39. He also threw up the second highest WAR ever on the team at 72.7, just a shade behind deadball pitcher Eddie Plank, and just ahead of Lefty Grove. Both players who deserve acknowledgement here as well. Rest well, Rickey. You are a joy to generations of fans beyond even your playing days, and will be remembered fondly for as long as people pick up baseballs, bats, or gloves. The Phillies are another team that's seemingly been around forever, yet has still managed to have one truly transcendent talent that rose above the rest, in third baseman Mike Schmidt, who not only posted the only triple-digit WAR in team history at 106.9, but squad-leading totals in home runs, RBI, runs, MVPs, and Gold Gloves won, with an impressive total of 3 and 10 in the latter 2 categories. If you were drafting all-time great third baseman, Mike would be a top 3 pick in any circle, based on both his numbers and his reputation back in the day of being a consummate professional and true leader on a Philly squad that managed to win the 1980 World Series with him as the most valuable player. We have back-to-back all-time performers at their respective positions, with Honus Wagner of the Pirates being one of baseball's first true superstars along with Speaker, in the process knocking nearly 3,000 hits with the Buccos, posting a 328, 394, 468 slash, with the franchise leading 154 OPS+, and 232 triples. While Roberto Clemente and Willie Stargell are surely legends in Pittsburgh as well, you can't ignore the impact that Honus was able to have on the game at large, remaking the idea of a shortstop from a defensive first position to a more balanced mix of offense and defense. Like Schmidt, if purely based off the numbers, he too would be a top 3 draft pick at his position, which he actually leads all-time in WAR at 131. The San Diego Padres, in a way, remind me a bit of an almost junior New York Yankees squad. Why? Because they have a closer at the top of their pitching leaderboard for WAR, which is far weaker than their hitters, historically speaking. Which for the Yankees is Mariano Rivera, another player who could have easily been shouted out, and for the Padres being Trevor Hoffman. Yet there's one player, an outfielder, who manages to rise above the rest. In Ruth for the Yankees, and Tony Gwynn for the Padres. The career San Diegoan leads his team in hits, doubles, singles, RBI, runs, stolen bases, batting average, and WAR, over doubling the next closest in Dave Winfield at a mark of 69.2 to 32.0. He had everything you'd want in a legendary career, a crazy productive peak, consistency into his old age, and leadership qualities that made everyone on his team better just by being around him, as well as getting to see his forward-thinking processes of analyzing tape and detecting pitcher habits. Like Henderson before, rest easy Tony, knowing you left a lasting impact on the baseball world at large. Our next selection brings with it a bit of a false pretense, that Barry Bonds, noted Reuter yet still a hitting legend, would need to be compared to Willie Mays for team dominance. But this isn't really as much of a conversation as one would think when you dig into the numbers a little bit. For the Giants, Willie had the superior totals in home runs, WAR, stolen bases, Gold Gloves, hits, doubles, and runs. Sure, his rate stats weren't as gaudy, but again, he was clean while posting them, and facing an amount of racism as one of the first black superstars in baseball that's hard to fathom in today's world. I'm sure even if you asked Bonds himself this, he would choose Willie, who was his godfather and in many ways mentor with the Giants. Mays is yet another legend lost in 2024, who will be dearly missed. The Mariners have a two-headed beast atop their team leaderboards who seem to trade team-leading totals like few others we've discussed today, in Ken Griffey Jr. and Ichiro Suzuki. Where Griffey leads in homers, Ichi leads in hits. Where Griffey reigns atop in WAR, Suzuki beats him in average by almost 30 points. And they both won the same number of Gold Gloves with the M's as well, at a ridiculous mark of 10. So, who's my choice? I think I'm going to have to go with Griffey here, who had one of the greatest peaks in MLB history from a pure production standpoint, crushing 417 homers in just under 1,700 games played, a near 40 home run per season pace. If he hadn't ended up moving on to Cincinnati and dealing with injuries in the back half of his career, it's very possible we'd be speaking about him in the same breath as guys like Mays, Bonds, and Ruth. But even as it stands today, his legacy as a Seattle legend lives on. Shout out here as well to Edgar Martinez and Felix Hernandez, who certainly deserve some acknowledgement themselves as Mariner greats. Bob Gibson, Albert Pujols, Rogers Hornsby. These are all legends of the game worthy of being considered as some of the best players ever at their respective spots, and they all made their names with the St. Louis Cardinals. However, none of them managed to stick with the team for the 3,000-odd contests that Stan the Man Musial did, allowing him to reign supreme in nearly every counting stat, including WAR at 128.5, homers at 475, hits at an absurd 3,630, doubles at 725, and walks at 1,599. He was Mr. Cardinal in his day, and remains at this lofty perch even in our modern era. Though, in addition to the guys I mentioned before, I also want to shout out Yadi Molina and Adam Wainwright as modern Redbird legends as well. We now go from one of the oldest franchises ever to tied for the youngest in the Tampa Bay Rays, and another slam dunk choice here in third baseman Evan Longoria. Not only does he lead his franchise in every major offensive category, including home runs, doubles, RBI, runs, WAR, and games played, but he managed to pair this with a generationally good peak in the late 2000s through the mid-2010s that saw him place top 20 in MVP voting 6 times, win a Rookie of the Year, and blast over 20 home runs 9 times, while playing Gold Glove caliber defense at the hot corner year in and year out. While he's probably not going to be a Hall of Famer, he still had a very good career, and easily the best one ever to be registered in Tampa. The Rangers are an interesting team, as while you could make the argument that Adrian Beltre has the best rate numbers for anybody with more than 1,000 games played on the squad, or that Rafael Palmeiro has the lead in many cumulative stats, I'm going to choose neither, opting instead to go with one of the greatest catchers of all time, and at the peak of his powers, in Ivan "Pudge" Rodriguez. During his prime in Arlington, Rodriguez posted 5 seasons with over 20 home runs, won 10 Gold Gloves, and posted the highest WAR in team history at exactly 50.0. Like many of the players on this list, we could go on all day about his MVP year in 1999, his crazy high average for a catcher with the team at 304, or the countless base runners he nabbed trying to steal. But I think we'll end here with the obvious admission that he's a top 3 catcher of all time, bar none, and he created much of that reputation with the Rangers. The Blue Jays are our second to last team, and is one of the few we'll end up returning to the mound for in Hall of Fame righty Roy Halladay. While he wasn't able to tally quite as much WAR, for all that's worth when it comes to pitchers, as Dave Stieb, he basically reigned supreme in every other category on a rate basis, and still approached his value total despite pitching in over 100 less games, at a mark of 48.4 to 56.9. This came with franchise-leading totals and strikeout rate in pitchers who threw over 1,500 innings for the team, ERA plus at a crazy 133, and second-place finishes in WHIP and ERA. He also won a Cy Young Award with the squad, making him one of just 4 pitchers in franchise history to do so. Our final team is the Washington Nationals, formerly and prominently the Montreal Expos. Why do I mention this? Because they only changed their location 20 years ago, in 2004, making them one of the most muddled in terms of intertwining team history. It's for this reason I'm going to be selecting an Expo here, even though they didn't play an inning of baseball for the current Nationals moniker. This is because, to me, the Nationals don't have the kind of rich history that a team like, for example, the Twins do at this point. So, who is my selection, you ask? Gary Carter, who's right up there with Pudge, Bench, Piazza, and Fisk for the greatest backstop ever, with much of his prime coming in Montreal, allowing him to post a team-leading value total of 55.8 while placing in the top 5 in home runs, hits, runs, and games played, again, despite being a catcher who was also perceived as a good fielder, as evidenced by his 3 Gold Gloves with the team. Alright everybody, that was the best player in every MLB team. Please consider leaving a like and subscribing if you enjoyed, and leave a comment below for any other videos you'd like to see done in this vein. Have a great rest of your day everybody, and I'll see you in the next one.